Hello, if you haven't seen the previous video, I recommend you do so because I go through the modules in this case and why they're there and why I've picked them. And this video is gonna just go through the first instance of how I actually patch this synth, which I use for improvised live performance. So let's just start with the things that rarely change, basically the connections to and from the mixer. I tend to stick to a very specific way of plugging things in and out so that I actually remember what is where all along, even if I change the rest of the patch. The first thing I usually do is I patch in the TipTop 1 into channel 1 of my mixer. I use the TipTop 1 mainly as my kick drum. It's got other percussion sounds and I use it for other things sometimes, but it tends to be the kick drum. So I stick to TipTop 1, channel 1. Never thought about it, but yeah, it makes sense, one on one. The next thing we do is patch our hat to channel 2. On channel 3, we've got the DFAM, which I take the VCA out from the DFAM and go into channel 3. Then I've got the Pony VCO conveniently located right above channel 4. So as you can see, the way you have positioned the modules in the case allows for a very efficient patching for things that are usually going to be there all along, as the audio outputs into the mixer. Radio music, which goes into the channel 5, again, is directly above it. It's very straightforward. That's that one, that's that one. The next thing we need to patch are the sends from my mixer into the dual effects from America Synths. I use the 2 channels of effect individually. It's very convenient with the mixer because it just pairs beautifully. It's got mono out, which goes into mono in, but then you've got the stereo out. So I've got 2 channels of stereo effect, which is great. So we have those, and then into send beat. We've got our clouds output stereo, which is going into the channel that's left in my mixer, which is got stereo in. I did look through a lot of mixers before I settled for this one. It packs a punch for the size. I was looking also at the Befaco Higgs mix, the WMD and other smaller mixers, but basically I wanted to have the 6 channels. I love the stereo one included in it, and I love the 2 sends and returns. And not just that, but the fact that you can actually monitor your channels. It's got EQ and it's got pan per channel. So for its size, it's just awesome. I love it. So to finish off our audio routings, rings is going to clouds. I'm sure a lot of people will be outraged by this. And this is pretty much it for the audio routings as such. And the last thing that we need to do is get the main output from the mixer. And that goes into the Golden Master, which is my final output, which is connected internally with the output from the Intellijel. I think it's a great asset to have in a performance case because it allows you to tweak a lot everything when you're playing and you don't know where you're going to be playing, you don't know what the sound quality is going to be like, if you're going to have any monitoring, if there's going to be rumble everywhere. Now we can start patching what actually creates the melodies and the beats. Next thing is to get our clocks going. So for that, I use Pamela's new workout into my steppy. So basically that will be that main clock. Then I take another clock. Normally I take channel 2 from Pam's, which will also be sending a clock, but a different one, to our clock on the Turing Machine. So if I just start the clock, I'm on 96 BPM. And as you can see, well, it all comes to life. So next thing we need to do is to clock the DFAM. So what I tend to do for that is I take my output D from the steppy and I bring it in to the advanced clock of the DFAM. That allows me to be very hands-on with the way the DFAM works. I can just have that sequence selected there, as you can see now, which is ending on that beat there. And then my green steps are the steps that will actually make the DFAM go forward. So you can do really funky grooves with it in this way, and you can actually be very performative. So next thing we need to do here is get our hats going. For the hats, I use these 2 switches. So I get 2 different signals for both open and close hi-hats from the different areas of my case. And then I can flick through those or switch them off with these switches here. I recommend putting some switches onto your case because It's a very cheap thing. It's extremely simple. You can make them yourself, and it opens up a whole load of performative possibilities. It's such a simple thing that opens so many doors that I can't recommend it enough. I've got 2 sets of them, so that says a lot. So for our hats, I normally take the pulses of the Turing machine into this one. It's this one here. So I've got output B. That's my hats there, close hats, and I take them there. So basically I've got those 2 different patterns at the flick of a switch here, and then I send the output, that's the close one, to my 2HP hat closed. For my open hat, I take a stackable cable and take it out of output C, which I will use later on also as the gate for my bass Pony VCO. Then I take the output from that switch to my open hat, and as you can see, the stiff cables start making these bridges, which are extremely handy to arrange things. I might swap these cables later on for something longer that comes around this way. You'll discover things as you're going along, and you find the ways that your cables are going to be routed. Rivers will start to form, and you just need to kind of tidy them up a bit so that you've got them bunched together. So I like being able to get to the synth. So then we've got this extra input for the hats, which come again from the Turing machine. So that means that we've got 2 random patterns generated by Turing machine being able to drive our hats, while at the same time we've got 2 defined patterns that we could be running to the hats. So makes for a lot of variation in what you can do with your hats in a quick way. We'll take that one, put it in there. So now, so as you can see, just by flicking those 2 switches, I can create a lot of variation, which is very controllable. At the flick of a switch, you can kill them from here, which is very handy as well. It makes for smoother changes when you're bringing things on and off, which is great. One less thing to worry about whether something's going to be a bit abrupt or is going to be cut off. Next, we've got the TipTop one, which is triggered from this top switch. So I'll take the output from that top switch into the gate in. And then the 2 inputs we get in here are take from the steppy, and that comes to the bottom of the switch. So that is basically that channel there. And again, I can switch it off from the switch. And what actually comes into that one does vary a lot between patches. Sometimes I have a faster pattern that could act like a kind of little build up, beat, repeat kind of. We bring another one from, let's take 4 from the Turing machine, so that now I can cut it from there. So we take output A from the steppy, and that comes to the bottom of the switch. So that is basically that channel there. And again, I can switch it off from the switch. And what actually comes into that one does vary a lot between patches. Sometimes I have a faster pattern that could act like a kind of little build up, beat, repeat kind of effect just by changing that. Others I just bring, which is what I'm going to do now. We just bring another one from, let's take 4 from the Turing machine, so that now I can cut it from there. So as it stands, what we've got now connected is the driving section of what I do with the synth. I've got the basic rhythm section there with my kick drum and my hi-hat plugged in. And then I've got the DFAM in sync with that. There's not much of a patch going on otherwise, but you can already start having fun with it as it is. And that's something that I tend to do a lot, which is that's the way I usually repatch. I'll build up something small that can be played on, and I'll probably just mess about with that as it stands for a bit until I start getting like brainwaves and ideas of what I could do or where to head or how to carry on with the patch based on how I'm enjoying what I've already got there. So let's just do that. So here, I mean, you can start adjusting your sounds. I could just play with a hi-hat a bit. I mean, I've got, especially before I finish patching my hats, because that's the problem with the 2HP, that it gets really cramped here with all the cables going in with a small knob. So this tends to be like set at the beginning, although I do have some external control later on from here. But I tend to just pick whatever it is that I'm going to be using and stay there. So the next thing we get to patch to get things going is basically what's going to be generating melodies, bass lines, and most of the variation within my patch. So that's all the Turing machine. So I take the output from volts into my 2HP tune. So that will be quantizing. Then I take a stackable cable and I get the output from the tune into the in of the Tessitura Tailor, which is an octave switch. So now I've got my melodies coming out that I can change the octave of, and that output goes into the volt per octave of rings. So now we've got a melody in effect. Let's lock that out of the Turing Machine, and if I turn up, so we've got that playing there now on a loop, and we've got a lot of control over this as it stands. We've got the octave here. This is just as whatever it was, nothing's been tweaked yet, so there's a lot of scope for shaping the core of what we're going to be playing with afterwards. And I've also got control over the steps, well, some control over the steps of the melody with the knobs here. That's all being controlled by the quantizer here, which I've got on a minor scale at the moment. So as you can see, this is extremely playable. I've also got control over the steps in the Turing Machine. Can't say enough of how playable that switch is on the Turing Machine. We can start playing really, and we could start this stage and carry on patching from here as a performance piece if we so wanted to do. I tend not to patch in live performance environment. I find that it's one step too far in the making life hard for yourself. I want to be kind of more or less sure of what's going to be doing what, and I don't have to reconsider that. Sometimes there's maybe one or 2 points that I do patch or unpatch, but they're very specific things. Usually just like gates going into something to trigger it because I don't have a switch for it. So in the TipTop one, I've got a number of percussion elements that I can just flick through with the knob here. But I do tend to use that for the main rhythm, so like kind of kick drum or kick drumish, although there's all kinds of stuff in here. So extremely playable already, and all I've got right now is brings through clouds and my hi-hats there. So we could get into clouds and maybe just smear this a bit, give it some reverb, so you can start to see how this small case can be extremely versatile and make a wide range of different sounds and music styles very easily, just tweaking a couple of things here and then. You can do it pretty fast while in the middle of our performance as well, as we'll be running through later on. Let's turn this down. Something I tend to do at this stage, patching the decay of your hats, and because I've got the 2HP here, which is really hard to access, I usually take that CV input and plug it into the Quadrat here, so I've got control with this knob over that, and that allows me to not just like have manual control of it here. I've also got the input here, which I could use, and I will probably use later on when I start going into the modulation of things, which we haven't really touched yet. So now we've got all the empty slots in this switch module. We've got those A and B inputs and these 3 switches that will flick to A, B, or they're dead in the middle. And they're really good for performative switches off. I tend to use them mainly for gates. What I normally plug in there is the straight output from the pulse from the Turing Machine. I know there's going to be quite a few hits in there. And then I usually pick something else, which it'll probably change over the assembly of the patch, but for now we can probably just take another one of the outputs from the pulses in the Turing Machine. So maybe the 214 maybe. So it's a more sparse kind of pattern that we've got there. And now I can connect that output there to the reset of my radio music, which we haven't heard yet. This is bits of music from international radio stations that I've got in this particular folder. So now we've got all the empty slots in this switch module, self-built. We've got those A and B inputs and these 3 switches that will flick to A, B, or they're dead in the middle. And basically they're really good for, again, like performative switches off. I tend to use them mainly for gates. I mean, you could use them for 12 voltage and then take another input from elsewhere. Normally like the pulse. So it's the pulse on the Turing Machine. So what I plug into A normally is the pulse from the Turing Machine. So that means there's going to give me quite a few. So it's going to be like a steady beat. I know there's going to be quite a few hits in there. And then I usually pick something else, which it'll probably change over the assembly of the patch. But for now, we can probably just take another one of the outputs from the pulses in the Turing Machine. So maybe the 2 plus 2 and 4 maybe. So it's a more sparse kind of pattern that we've got there. And now I can connect that output there to the reset of my radio music. This has just got random bits of music from international radio stations, from Radio Garden, which is a site that I thoroughly recommend if you like getting found sounds and all kinds of just randomness, really, but awesome randomness. So I can now trigger that from here, and I've got quite a bit of control. It's something I like about the radio music. You can use it to play like straight sample. You could manually retrigger it, which is extremely playable in conjunction with the start knob. So from here, what I normally do is I just start to play and patch at the same time, which is what I'm gonna do in this instance. So for example, we've got this kick drum playing, and I've got the CV in for the TipTop one, which is set to control the pitch coming in, and it's quantized inside the module, which is great. So what I'm going to do is use the sample and hold to take the melody that's being spat out of my 2HB tune. So I'm going to take that same output there. It's going to go into the hold in. The hold out's going to go into that switch. Then I'm going to connect the switch itself to the TipTop CVN. And now I've got control over not just the gates on that kick drum at the touch of a switch, but I've also got possibility of throwing in different control voltages to it, so I can do like a kick baseline kind of thing all in one. All I need to do here to spice this up a bit is trigger my sample and hold with something. So I could trigger it from out C here, which is basically doing kind of offbeat baseline pattern at the moment. Start some tidying up just for demonstration purposes. I wouldn't tidy up at this point because this all was getting the right lengths of cable, swapping some over and just threading things slightly differently. What we want to do is start playing with our bass. So that's the Pony VCO without any kind of envelope. It's running wild. So let's trigger our bass from the baseline gates. Let's connect the output into the VCA, and now we've got the envelope for our bass, which allows quite a bit of expression. At the moment, with the way the case is configured, although I've got possibilities of filtering that if I route it through the DFAM, for example, the beauty of the Pony VCO is that I've got this timbre control, which we can also control through CV. And we've got the octave switch, which is incredibly useful. So now we might want to run a volt per octave from the same as this one, which is the kick drum. So the bass line and the kick drum are playing the same tune. Solo that. Maybe add some reverb to those hats. Let's tidy this up a bit. Just punch them up. So what I do at this point normally is I probably play around with the DFAM for a bit and settle it in a pattern that's got potential and that has got a lot of tweakability in it. And the way to do this is just just tweak and listen really, and see it where it feels good for you. It's hard to describe how I go about this, because I don't start with a specific thing that I'm trying to achieve normally, and if I do, I most of the time change my plans completely halfway through it. So yeah, I'm just gonna play with this whole thing for a bit and see what we can get here going. I'll probably want to start patching the DFAM itself, so maybe getting the pitch into the filter modulation. And remember that the DFAM's being clocked from over here. If we actually go and see what's happening here, you'll see that we can just put on every step, make it a long, so we can hear what the DFAM would normally be like if it wasn't being clocked from elsewhere. And at this stage, I might want to maybe start incorporating a bit of physical interactivity into the equation. So I'm gonna get ears to be the stimulation for rings. And what I'm gonna do now is also connect one of these switches here that have got the A and B gate patterns coming through. So as the second one there, I'm gonna connect this to the strum so that I can get multiple triggers from a single hit over here. So I've got ears now as the source of sound for rings to process. I've got a drumstick that's got a little brush on the other side, which is really handy to do different things with a contact mic. But now basically I can just start playing my synth as a percussion instrument. This is great for experimental and ambient sets and for improvising with other musicians. You could do a really long chain of just that, then processing clouds further, and maybe splitting the signal and processing it differently. You could do all kinds of stuff, especially bearing in mind that with clouds you could create this whole cloud of sound, and you can make a whole atmosphere out of it. So it's extremely versatile. Let's see if we can create a whole thing going on just when triggered from ears using clouds. So let's turn up the reverb, the contact microphone, because it's on quite a sensitive setting at the moment. I could turn it down a bit, but basically whenever I manipulate the mixer, that's picked up by the contact microphone as well. So switching anything has got an added effect. So I'm just gonna leave you with this little jam with what I've patched so far. So hopefully see you next time, where I'll be doing some more patching and getting into more detail on the modulation that can go into this particular patch and setup. Please like and subscribe, as it really helps my channel, and I hope I'll see you again. Bye.